How did the pub become so central to British culture? I'm Ben Henderson, and welcome to Here for the History from BBC Sounds, the show where we uncover the historical origin stories behind everyday life. Today, we'll hear how women set up the medieval alehouse, how the Reformation led to a golden age of boozers, and how competition from gin created the iconic Victorian pub. But with younger generations turning away from alcohol, are pubs history, or are they a sacred part of our culture? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, hype, and subscribe so you never miss out. So Alice, almost exactly 10 years ago, I was travelling with a friend around Japan. I remember it was actually the night of my 20th birthday, and we'd been out there for about 4 weeks by this point. So we'd had quite a lot of the local culture, and we fancied some home comforts. Now, it was a very, very small, kind of isolated, sleepy town, but we did notice near our hostel a sign for a British pub. So we decided we'd venture out, expecting it to be, dead empty, especially given it was a weeknight. But when we got to the door, we pushed it open, and inside it was absolutely heaving. There's all the local office workers there, necking pints of lager. And we approached the bar, and they told us it was actually the pub's anniversary, so everything was half price.
Amazing. Wow. Absolute scenes. So, Ben travelling in Japan, and you're in a British pub. I would expect nothing less.
Yeah, well, despite not speaking any Japanese as well, and the locals speaking absolutely no English, we had an absolutely cracking evening with them. It was brilliant. One of my most memorable birthdays, for sure. And it got me thinking, the pub is definitely one of the most popular symbols of Britishness, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what's so wonderful about pubs is they play a part in people's lives in all sorts of different ways. People go to the pubs to watch sport, to meet up with old friends. There's even funeral wakes held in pubs. So I suppose it's remarkable how much of our lives do revolve around them.
Absolutely. So today, we're going to trace the history of the pub, the backstory, so to speak. But I should point out there are regional variations, as there always are, across Britain and the island of Ireland. So today I'm going to focus on the English pub specifically. I'm not going to try and tell its entire history because we'd be here all week, but I'll pick out some key turning points that made the pub the venerated institution it is today.
Fantastic. Well, I am looking forward to it as a great pub enthusiast. So Ben, pour me a pint. I'm here for the history.
Chapter 1, Birth of the Pub. We're starting today in medieval Oxford in the 1300s, and we're starting in the living room, or the kitchen rather, of a woman named Maud London, and she's standing over a great big pot. Inside her pot is malted barley, which she mixes with hot water, and eventually she produces ale.
Oh, amazing. Well done, Maud. I'm imagining her with big pot moving a bit with a wooden
Exactly.
spoon.
Beautifully done.
Okay, so let's talk about ale. Everyone was drinking ale back then, weren't they?
Yeah.
Men, women, children. Some say it was safer to drink ale than it was to drink water. I think that's a bit disputed, perhaps, but it was also known as a great supply of calories. So it's this like miracle drink.
Exactly. And one point to make is this was ale and not beer. So beer requires hops, which is a plant which is integral to the brewing process for beer. But that hops wasn't introduced to Britain until later on. Now, ale, so made without hops, goes off pretty quickly. So once Maud has drunk her fill, she sells her excess ale to people in the local area. And in doing so, she becomes known as an alewife, and her home, where she sells the ale from, becomes an alehouse.
Okay, love it. So she is making this ale at home. Is this the kind of home brewing, the start of home brewing?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's becoming more and more trendy in recent years,
Are
isn't
you
it?
a home brewer, Ben?
Well, I haven't started yet, but I am about to enter my 30s, so I do
yeah.
feel that is the age for
Your time has come.
obscure hobbies, things like home brewing, bread making, that kind of stuff. So yeah,
You'll be
just wait a few years and
brilliant
I'll check
hipster.
back in on that.
Ben's Brew, is that what it's called?
Too right, or Henderson's Finest, something like that. Yeah, I can see it happening.
I'll be on board with it.
Excellent stuff. All right, but back to Maud. She isn't alone in brewing her own ale. She's one of many women who basically dominate England's brewing industry at the time. And alehouses, like hers, are by far the most common form of drinking establishment in medieval Britain.
Okay, so the original boozer, and all pushed by women.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And there's a brilliant name for the punters who are turning up at many of these alehouses. So they're known as ale knights.
An ale night. That is
Yeah.
such a good phrase. Bring that back. So if you're someone who goes to the pub a lot today, you are a modern day ale night.
I know. Well, next time we go for a drink, I think I'll adopt that.
Love
That's my
it.
title. Anyway, so although I've said these alehouses, they're very widespread, this industry, the industry that Maud's involved in, is very local, obviously. It's very small scale at this point. Maud's basically doing it as a side hustle to earn some extra cash on the side. But things soon begin to change. So over the next century or two, so this is from roughly the 1300s to around the 1500s, we see the arrival of hops from mainland Europe. Now, adding hops to the brewing process produces beer, which lasts much longer than ale before it goes off, which is crucial because businessmen then realised that beer could be produced in much higher quantities and transported to where the demand is. So beer becomes big business, and the alewives like Maud are sadly left behind.
Oh no, I'm very sorry to hear that. Okay, so we're seeing the brewing industry going from these small scale operations like Maud's to much more professional, widespread organized operation. So is this where the pub emerges?
Well, where we are in
Sorry,
the medieval era.
Bit early.
Yeah, where we are in the medieval era, the pub, or the word pub, doesn't exist yet.
Okay.
So it only starts being used much later on as an umbrella term for a range of British drinking establishments. Now, during the medieval period, where we are, there are three main types of establishment, and that's the alehouse, the tavern, and the inn. So we've obviously, already discussed the medieval alehouse, which is the most common and generally frequented by people slightly lower down the social order. Then above the alehouse, you've got the tavern. They're much more upmarket. They might be in a kind of multi-story townhouse, and they primarily sell wine and good food, although they might sell some ale on the side, but their main thing is fancy wine.
Okay, classy.
Exactly,
I
yeah.
think I'd like that.
More sophisticated.
I'd be hanging out there.
Yeah, definitely more Alice Loxton.
Thank you.
And then at the top of the hierarchy, so the Ben Henderson kind of level,
Okay.
there's the inn. And the purpose of the inn is basically to provide lodging to travellers and as well as food and drink. Now, there are obviously many fancy clients visiting these inns, but you might also get some less well-off travellers. And to save money, some of these poorer guests might actually share a bed with strangers. So we've got a report from a man called John Cannon, who spent a night at the Hart Inn in Hampshire. And he writes afterwards that in his sleep when he was there, his bedfellow, and I quote, grasped me and cried out, "Ah, my dear Peggy," mistaking John for his wife.
This is wild. Okay, what happens next?
Well, he writes, and I quote, "I soon made him sensible of the mistake." So let's just hope they had a cuddle and went back to sleep.
Quite sweet then. Cute. Okay, so the thought of having to share a bed with a stranger does not fill me with joy and makes me quite grateful, I suppose, to be in the modern world. But otherwise, the inn sounds like a fun place to be. Okay, so there have been drinking establishments around for years. I mean, lots of places claim to be the oldest pub. Do we actually know? Can we mark out which is the oldest one?
Yeah, well, you're right to say there are all sorts of claims, and most of them seem like complete nonsense. But I spoke to Dr. James Wright about this. Now, he's a buildings archaeologist and a pub specialist, so a bit of an authority on
Okay,
these things.
respect.
And he reckons that the George Inn in Somerset has a strong claim to being England's oldest pub in continuous use, and it dates from the 1300s.
Wonderful. Well, that's one for the list. So we have three main medieval precursors to the pub, but I think the audience will want to know what it was like to visit one of these fine establishments. And before the show, you sent me this iconic description of an alehouse. It's from William Langland's famous poem Piers Plowman, and this was written in the 1300s. So just to kind of summarize the poem, it tells this story of a man called Glutton. He's supposed to be on his way to church, but he gets sidetracked, which seems like I can understand that. And he gets sidetracked by an alewife called Betty the Brewster.
Great
It's
name.
amazing names. And Betty entices Glutton into her local with the promise of good ale. And then inside, there's this amazing cross-section of medieval society. So there's the fiddler, the rat catcher, the priest. They're all in the alehouse. They all get really, really drunk. And when he tries to leave, we're told that Glutton's eyes dimmed. So he's obviously had quite a lot to drink. And then he stumbles on the threshold. And he ends up vomiting in someone else's lap. So, sounds like a big night out. Maybe a night out you might have had in Manchester, Ben.
Well, that sounds actually quite civilised compared to what you see on Peter Street in Manchester on a Saturday night, I have to say.
But I love how the poem, it takes us in this world of the medieval alehouse, but it does feel quite modern, don't you think? I mean, people from all walks of life, lots of good humour. There's always one who takes it a bit far, gets a bit sloppy.
Exactly. It's a story as old as time, isn't it, Alice?
Nothing ever changes.
Anyway, these medieval drinking establishments spread, but their owners increasingly want to distinguish them from the surrounding buildings. Now, remember, most people were illiterate at the time, so the owners would hang distinctive signs outside the front of their buildings, outside the front of their drinking establishments, to make them recognisable. So things like lambs, doves, ploughs, and so on. And this was eventually made a legal requirement.
So this is the start of the fantastic pub signs and the pub names that we have today.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought I might try and test your pub name knowledge, Alice.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. So, Alice, do you know what the most common pub name in Britain is?
I think I do, because we've talked about it before on the show. It's the Red Line, isn't it? And I think it's when King James VI of Scotland becomes James I of England, and then across the land people adopt the Red Lion of Scotland to show loyalty to the new king.
Very good, Alice. Well done. Okay, one of the other most popular names is the Royal Oak. Do you know what the backstory is behind that?
Okay, so this comes from Charles II, who seems to be a bit of a regular on this show. And he was on the run from Parliament's forces during the Civil War, and supposedly he hid in an oak tree, and this became this very famous story, the story of the Royal Oak. And when the monarchy was restored after the Civil War and he became king, many pubs adopted the name to kind of celebrate that story. So the Royal Oak is that's the name, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, and there are plenty of other pubs named after monarchy. So the Crown, that's an obvious one. But you also have things like the White Horse. So that's one of the symbols of the House of Hanover. And the White Hart was a heraldic symbol of Richard II.
Of course, and then some of them are religious. So you might have the Cross Keys, which might be named after St. Peter. His symbol was the keys to heaven. And you often see those ones when they're located next to a church. So that's quite a good one to look out for, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. So I think we've got the lay of the land here, that there are these three major types of drinking establishments. They've got their fun names, and they've got their quirky signs. And then the arrival of hops is starting to make this a big brewing business, and we're going from ales to beer. I look forward to finding out how we arrive at the modern pub. And for everyone watching, please let us know in the comments your favourite pub name. And don't forget to like, hype, and subscribe.
Chapter 2, The Golden Age. So, Alice, during the medieval period, England was loyal to the Catholic Church in Rome, of course. And part of the Catholic way of life involved lots of boozy feast days. Plus, local parishes would raise money for the church through what are called church ales, which are basically marathon booze-ups. And on top of this, monks at monasteries did lots of brewing. So basically, lots of village life and celebrations were focused in and around the local church. But everything changes in the 1500s when the country goes through the Protestant Reformation.
Okay, so just to briefly summarise, the Reformation is a hugely complicated process, but basically England breaks from the Catholic Church, and many Catholic traditions, for instance the feast days, they're reduced. Henry VIII famously shuts down the monasteries.
Exactly. So I spoke to Professor Peter Clarke about this. He wrote a seminal book called The English Alehouse, and he says Protestant and particularly Puritan preachers basically want to drive these Catholic traditions out of the church. And this leaves a bit of a vacuum in English social life. But thankfully, the drinking establishments we've talked about are on hand to fill the gap.
I see. So all of these social traditions and celebrations basically move from the church to the pub.
Yes. And on top of this, during the medieval period, England is a very rural country. The vast majority of people live off the land in the countryside, but from the 1500s, the country begins to urbanize fast. The population booms, and people have a bit more money to spend in their pocket. Now, obviously, the people in these growing cities still want to drink, so you get a massive boom in urban drinking establishments, generating what's been called a golden age of the English boozer from around the 1500s to around 1700.
Is that a proper term? The golden age of the English boozer. Love it.
Well, it's called a golden age. I've added on the English boozer bit.
Okay. I always imagined that there would be a kind of ale house on every corner. I mean, how many are we actually talking?
Okay, well, so the historian Peter Clarke, he suggests there may have been around 58,000 alehouses by the end of this period. So this is around the year 1700. Now, that is roughly one alehouse for every 90 inhabitants of the country. And that's not even taking into account, the taverns and the inns. So let's compare that to today. The historian Philip Howell says that today we have roughly one pub for every 1,500 people. So you can get a sense of quite how many pubs per person there were back then.
That's amazing. Great. Take me back. Okay, wait. So why did they need so many? How did that happen?
What a ridiculous question.
Sorry,
no, but in all seriousness, this was a time when most towns and cities didn't have many dedicated places for everyday activities. So things like conducting business, coroner's inquests, political campaigns, all these sorts of things, clubs, societies. Today they might have specialized premises, but back then they didn't. So the boozer essentially becomes the focal point for many of these community activities. And it's in this period that these establishments begin to be referred to as public houses.
I see. A house for the public. Okay, it's almost like a village hall. It's a kind of multi-purpose community centre sort of vibe.
Exactly. So inns would often be the venue for theatre plays, for example. And alehouses might host some of the more bloodthirsty entertainments of the day. So that might be things like cockfighting or badger baiting, all sorts.
Oh yeah, the blood sports. I think they had bull baiting as
bull
well.
baiting.
Pretty gruesome.
Yeah. Would you go back to a bull baiting or a cockfighting pub in the Middle Ages?
There are some things from history I do want to go back to, but that is not one of them.
Well, you can of course see the legacy of that in some of the pub names, can't you? So like Ye Olde Fighting Cocks is a very famous pub, and that would have been a legacy from this era.
In St Albans, yes, I know it.
Exactly. So as well as entertainment, there's also many other functions. So alehouses might be the place where people heard the news, because remember, this is a time before mass media. Most people are still illiterate. So the boozer was where they could go and discuss politics, hear what was going on.
Okay, so this is, I suppose, the time before newspapers and phones. You can just go and sit in the pub, sit in the alehouse. Amazing. Another excuse to go to the pub.
Exactly, yeah. But there were plenty of rituals and social norms that you might recognise from your local today. So the historian Mark Hailwood has done some great work on this, and he says back then they had things we'd recognise like the financial obligation to buy your rounds or pay your share of the pot at the end of the night. There's the expectation that you match the drinking capacity of your companions. And of course, there's the requirement that you drink huge amounts and still keep control of your mental and physical capacities.
Love it. Well, I love that these rules and regulations. And I imagine that these rituals, like today, often ended up with people getting a bit out of control, maybe being peeled off the pub floor.
Yeah, so Hailwood actually provides some great examples of this. There's one from 1604 where a group of men are drinking at an alehouse. And when one of them calls for a huge great stone pot containing about 2 gallons, so roughly 16 pints of beer,
Cool.
and they call the pot Fowler. So they're up all night playing drinking games, but one of them makes the crucial error of falling asleep, Alice. Rookie error. So he's described in this account as hanging down his head, foaming, slavering, and pissing as he sat. So in a sort of shaming ritual to punish him, they put a sack over his head, and they declare that his nickname from then on will be Fowler. And the final humiliation is to remove his codpiece. So we're told his carnal instrument is publicly exposed.
Oh no, poor man, poor Fowler. Never live it down. I mean, it does sound quite similar to stories from kind of university sports socials today. And we mentioned the alewives earlier. I mean, were these just drinking establishments for men, or were there women involved?
Yeah, well, Mark Hailwood says they were male-dominated spaces, but certainly not exclusively male places. So you might get widows running a tavern once their husband had died, or young women working as barmaids. And you get plenty of female customers. So wives would go with their husbands. Young couples might go when they're courting each other. Plus, women certainly got involved in some of the heavy drinking. So Hailwood has this great story of a woman called Elizabeth Case in the 1620s, who basically goes toe-to-toe, drinking with her male friends. And even when she's hammered, she refuses to be taken home, which I thought was quite heroic.
Elizabeth Case. It's like refusing to get in the taxi when
Yeah.
you're really, really drunk.
Exactly.
Things never change. Okay, so Ben, you've taken us through this golden age when alehouses, inns, and taverns became this hugely important part of everyday life, not just for drinking, but for all sorts of activities. Where do we go next? And when do we finally get to call them the pub? When does it come?
Well, that will be revealed in the next chapter, Alice. Chapter 3, The Gin Palace. So, Alice, you've written a book on the famous Georgian satirical artists, haven't you?
I have. I'm a huge fan of Georgian satire.
Okay, great. So I'm going to describe a very famous Georgian print and see if you can identify it.
Okay, I'm being tested. All right, I'm ready. I'm ready to go.
So in the centre of the image is a really bedraggled woman. She's sitting on some steps. Her legs are covered in scabs. Her shirt is wide open. And she has a drunken smile on her face. She basically seems totally unaware of her surroundings or that her baby is falling headfirst from her arms down the steps. Now, do you know what this print is?
Yes, I do. It is, of course, Gin Lane. It's
Yes.
quite a famous print. It's made by the great artist William Hogarth. He made it in the 1750s. And it was during a period called the gin craze. It was when cheap gin had suddenly flooded England, and it caused a massive wave of public drunkenness, public disorder, and actually destroyed many people's lives, like the woman in this image.
Absolutely. So during this period, small shops are popping up, selling gin over the counter, basically. And this is ripping apart poor communities in particular. And so there's a huge drive to get people back on softer drinks like beer.
Yes, and Hogarth did create another print as well, which is called Beer Street. And everyone's smiling, everyone's very jolly. It's happy days, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And the implication is clear of those two prints next to each other. You know, beer is good, gin is bad, basically. So through this period, through the 17 and early 1800s, you get various attempts to get the gin craze under control. Sometimes it works for a period, but gin always seems to come back. So in 1830, you get the Beer Act, which basically deregulates the selling of beer in order to promote it over gin. And it was brought in by none other than the Duke of Wellington when he was PM, I'm pleased to say.
What a legend. Not only did he defeat Napoleon, he liberated beer. Very grateful.
True patriot.
Yeah,
Love
exactly.
it. And you can hear all about Wellington in our episode on the British stiff upper lip. Anyway, back to the Beer Act in 1830. So, deregulating the sale of beer basically generates an absolutely enormous boom in very cheap beer houses. But of course, this wasn't great for the old public houses we've been talking about, because on one side, they've got competition from gin. Then on the other, there's these new beer houses undercutting them in price. Plus, many of those old social activities we were talking about earlier that the public houses facilitated, they've either gone out of fashion, like, badger baiting or whatever, or they might take place elsewhere on specifically, purpose-built premises.
Okay, so there's more competition and their role in public life is contracting a bit.
Exactly, Alice. So some of them decide to adapt.
Ah, okay. What do they do?
Well, I spoke to the historian Professor Paul Jennings about this. So his book called The Local is one of the definitive works on pub history. And he says that starting in the early 1800s, a number of the public houses go for what's basically a massive rebrand. So many of them decide to embrace gin as well as beer. And then in terms of design, they adopt some of these beautiful new features that are being used in the fashionable shops and department stores of the time. So these are things like plate glass, etched mirrors, and lovely gas lighting.
I see, and this creates that kind of iconic Victorian pub look, the warm, shining light through the translucent coloured glass. It's kind of warm and cosy vibes. The sort of places that you imagine in Dickens novels.
Absolutely. And that look was revolutionary at the time, particularly the use of gas lighting rather than candlelight. And it really kind of draws people in, these magnificent exteriors and interiors. And this new, elaborate look earns these establishments the name gin palaces.
Ah, of course. And I mean, they feel very glamorous today, and we're actually very used to them now, but they must have seemed quite magical at the time.
Exactly. And then there's another crucial innovation of the gin palace, and that is the introduction of the beautifully carved mahogany bar, which is said to have evolved from the gin shop counter I mentioned earlier.
Wow, this is a big moment. The bar. Okay, that's exciting. And actually thinking about some of the places I've been to, the Philharmonic dining rooms in Liverpool, it's quite an amazing place. It's got this really beautiful bar and interior. So thinking it must have been that sort of thing. So are we saying that public houses didn't have a bar until that point?
That's right, they didn't. So previously, you would have given your order in a public house to one of the staff, like in a modern restaurant.
So it's table service.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And they'd usually go and collect the drink from a completely separate room, slower, more relaxed. But the serving bar we know today and the beer machine with the pumps on it, they're adopted around the turn of the 19th century, so around the early 1800s.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'm sort of surprised that it arrived so late. It seems like quite an obvious way to be serving drinks.
Well, yeah, so one factor that leads into this that I haven't mentioned, but it hangs over all of these innovations, is the Industrial Revolution. So for the first time in history, millions of men are finishing work at exactly the same time. So they all flood at once to these drinking establishments. And so you get innovations like the bar and the beer machine to speed up service so you can deal with this massive influx of men coming at the same time.
I see. The Industrial Revolution playing an important role yet again in many surprising ways.
It always does, doesn't it? Now, Paul Jennings says that the design features that we just discussed, pioneered by these gin palaces, they eventually become common features in many other public houses. And the gin palace itself really just becomes a style of public house rather than a distinct entity. And that is where we get the image of the traditional Victorian pub.
Wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. And then to round it all off, Jennings says that it's during the mid-1800s that the public houses that we've been talking about begin to be widely referred to as pubs.
I see. So we finally have the pub. Looking at the pub today, I suppose it's had a lot of challenges in recent years. People say that there's more competition from TV, from our phones. Maybe people aren't very good at conversation anymore. But you can also buy alcohol quite cheaply at home, which makes it quite expensive often to go to the pub. So, Ben, what do you reckon? Will pubs be just as important to British culture in a century's time?
Well, I mean, I have no idea, frankly, but I do think pubs have adapted well in the past to some of these changes. I think compared to the past, for instance, women and families feel much more comfortable going to the pub. It's not just a place for, older men. Gastropubs serve much better food than they used to. But it's hard to say because, as we all know, younger generations are a lot more health conscious than their predecessors. They drink a lot less. And more of their socialising is done online, of course. So who knows?
Okay, well, I think that's the right place to end. Ben, this has been fascinating. I think my highlight has been learning about the fact that they used to call regular pub dwellers ale knights. I think that's such a good phrase. I see you as an ale knight before me. So everyone, thank you so much for listening. Do let us know if you have any comments or any suggestions for future episodes. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, hype and subscribe if you're here for the history. And until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.